What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Hello and welcome back. You are watching another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. I am your host, Coach Lorraine Lindsey, a certified life coach, peak performance coach, and I am here in the house to talk about perspective conversations, bringing real life people from the community to talk about things that if you just shift your mind just a little bit, you can change your life. And today we're going to be talking about identifying boundaries. And so I have a very special guest in-house so we can have a little bit of male and female perspective on the topic. But before we tell you what the topic is, do not forget to subscribe to our channel. If you like the content, send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. If there are things you want us to talk about, let us know. Don't forget us to give us the thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. Our guests, or my guest today, is a friend that I've known for several years now. He has inspired me to get into the real estate business, got me on the map with that. And I said, actually, we had a conversation about you coming onto the show. And you said, yeah, I want to talk about something that's important to me and something that you've learned within your own life, which is about boundaries. And we'll get into that. But before, let me introduce my friend, Sam Cohen. And a little bit about Mr. Cohen here. Sam is actually a Las Vegas local. He was born and raised in Las Vegas. And for people that are not from Vegas, that's a rarity. This is a very transient town, so we get a lot of people who are from everywhere else in the world. He is one of the top producing Las Vegas realtors here in Las Vegas. He works for the brokerage Rothschild Gordon Company, in which he leads his very own elite team of agents. His team is called the Cohen Group LV. Sam is also a very proud dog dad. He has a beautiful dog, an English bulldog, Mr. Magoo, who is 2 years old. Sam, welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. I think this will be good. Sometimes we have a panel and sometimes it's just a one-on-one. But I think this is a great topic for us to talk about, where I have my woman's perspective on it, and you have yours. And then we just have our overall professional perspective, personal perspective on identifying boundaries. And I actually think that this is kind of like a hot topic because I've been hearing it a lot amongst people where they're like, I need to set boundaries, or I don't know how to set boundaries, or this person overstepped their boundaries. And it's really about what are boundaries? How do we create boundaries, and why it's so important to have boundaries in our lives? So let's start with the first bullet point. Well, first of all, how are you, Sam?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Good. I zipped right through that opening. I was like, let's just get to it.
It was good.
Yeah, I was on a little hiatus here. I did some video footage, so I haven't filmed in a while. So I feel a little rusty. But it's time. I need good content. So I'm glad you're the first person to come back with me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I mean, we talked about this for a little while. Took a little time to put together, but we're getting it done, right?
We're getting it done. Here we are. All right, so I want to ask this question first, right? The first question is, why do you think it's hard for people to set healthy boundaries?
I think the first thing you got to do is ask yourself, what are your boundaries? I think a lot of times people don't take a lot of time to really explore that. What's okay, what's not okay. They kind of wing it. And then once they're winging it, they're letting things like float by them that really don't work for them. And then they maybe don't know how to correct them. I mean, the first thing you got to do is identify, right?
Right. But why do you think it is hard for people to set boundaries? Because it sounds simplistic when we talk about it. It seems obvious, I should say, what your boundaries should be in life when it comes to your work world or in relationships or with friendships. But people have such a difficult time actually establishing what boundaries are and letting people know. But why do you think they're afraid of actually setting boundaries and sticking to them?
I think it's learned habits. And I hate to say it, like most people are enablers, right? There's not a lot of people that break the mold and do things, right? And even when you look at it, I feel like people with really, really strong boundaries, what is the first thing they say about those people? Oh, they're cold. They're cold. They weren't empathetic enough.
Right.
They
That's so
weren't this, they
true.
weren't that. So the first thing you got to do is be able to break away from that, right?
That is so true,
And be able
actually.
to do things. So I think that that's probably the first thing, right? And people make you feel like even if they do something wrong or this or that, you're supposed to be empathetic and hear them out and be apologetic. But being apologetic and forgiving is very different than giving people the space and the, what is the word I'm looking for? Basically the entitlement to be close enough to you to possibly do it again.
You know, I get
Or for
myself
you
into
to let you do
trouble.
it yourself, you know?
I get myself into trouble a lot because I'm very vocal about things with people. So if I have friendships or in business particularly, I'm very straightforward, and my boundaries, my lines are they're drawn very deep in the sand. And when those boundaries are crossed, I'm very vocal and I'm very comfortable saying, but I do recognize that some people don't receive that very well from me because they're not comfortable with boundaries. So let's say, for example, someone's making choices in their life that it's, for me, I see like this is a bad choice. And as a friend, I want to say, what you're doing is you need to create boundaries. A lot of times people don't even want to hear the conversation about setting boundaries when they know they don't have them established for themselves. So this article I was reading, Psychology Today, it gave a couple pointers as to why people have a hard time setting boundaries. And one of them, and I'll read a little excerpt and then we'll talk about it, was FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. And the thought of missing any kind of opportunity for growth, fun, recognition, or something that leads to a feel-good result catapults you into a sea of overcommitment and perpetual quest for experience. FOMO reflects a desire for excitement, mobility, connection, and adventure. On a healthy day, this can help you learn and engage in dynamic ways. Operating extreme can lead to constant chaos and little time to be more selective and intentional in your activities and how they relate to your long-term goals. So in terms of setting boundaries and why some people don't, it's that whole FOMO thing. Like if I say no, I can't attend this event, or no, I can't participate in this. For example, with me with the podcast, let's say, Sam, I need you to come on my show, but you have other commitments. Some people won't, they'll try to make room for things that they don't have time for. And then what ends up happening is they become flaky or unaccountable or non-reliable. And it's simply because they don't have the boundaries and they overcommit themselves. So what do you think about that specifically when it pertains to the fear of missing out when it comes to establishing boundaries?
Well, I mean, that leads right back to priorities, right?
Hmm.
And that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. People don't prioritize and they actually don't put the thought into what is important.
Right.
I run a successful business. I hate to say it. If I don't have time, my business comes before about anything. I
Right.
work all the time, but that's what's important to me. And I have a lot of people that, for a long time, and I'll be honest with you, I let them get in my head a little bit. You work too much. You need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. And I kind of like sat there and I resignated on it and then finally came to the conclusion. You know what that conclusion was?
What?
I work too much for you. I don't work too much for me because I like success and I like doing what I'm doing, but that's also what breaks the mold, right? And it takes a lot of people to have a lot of strength to go ahead and exactly what you're saying, give up these personal events, give these things up. But I was able to make work a priority because I know that for me, and I'm
Hmm.
not saying it's for everybody, everybody should have different priorities. I'm not saying everybody needs to be like me. Everybody needs to have a balance. You know what I mean? But for me, I find a lot of pride in running a successful business.
Now, but let me ask you a question. I'm going to interrupt you because one of the things that you said, and this is what's important because people need to hear this, is you said initially you let it get into your head.
Yeah.
That you had that thing is like, well, maybe I am not attending this, or maybe I'm not giving enough people time. Maybe I am working too much. So how did you overcome that hurdle for you? How did you come to the realization that I need to make certain things a priority now without eliminating friendship? Because here's the thing, sometimes people with the FOMO thing and setting boundaries, there's a fear behind that. They're afraid that, well, if I don't commit to this, if I don't do this with them, will they stop inviting me? Will I not be a part of this? How do you overcome that without the fear of losing out on experiences and friendships?
So for me, I did come to the conclusion, one, I was going out a lot and the things that I was going out to do most of the time, one, I really didn't enjoy that much anyways. I'm not really like, I like going to dinners. I like, maybe going out to concerts and doing things here and there, but being out all the time to me is just honestly not something that's important to me. And I realized that it was causing me anxiety because I wasn't getting stuff done that I would prefer to get done. So then, one, I made my priority. But two, you have to also understand that friends sometimes have a time and a place. So if they were your friends at one point when your priorities were going out, having friends, doing this, and that was what was more important to you, and then all of a sudden your priorities change, you have to understand it's not that you outgrew them or they outgrew you. Circumstances change. Like, can I ask you a question? Do you still worry about your best friend in the third grade and where that person went?
All the time.
Do you?
No, I'm just
That's
kidding.
great. But I was about to
No,
say,
of course
you got
not. Of course not.
But
Yeah.
that's the same thing, right? But that would be, so if you're so worried about losing these people or, things changing, that you can't let go and do what you want to do for yourself. Unfortunately, what's the difference between that friend that you were hanging out 5 days ago and that friend from the third grade? And I think that that's the problem, that for people to differentiate. And I hate to say it, like, you need to let your life naturally happen and stick to your goals because you only have one chance at everything, right? And if you dumb yourself down to appease other people and stick around, I hate to say it, long term, when you look back on your life, I think you're going to have a lot of regret.
And I think to kind of piggyback to what you're saying, I think that there's balance with boundaries. And I think that you use the word prioritize. And when we have this fear of missing out on something, I think the way to kind of hone it in and to really establish those boundaries is to say, well, what is it that I'm really afraid of missing out on? And how does that align with what my priorities are? So for example, with you were like, you know what, I need to build a business because I'm building this business and I'm building it for success because I want to have more freedom for this. And so it becomes this like, here's all the things that I want for my life and let me put them in the order in which they need to happen. And when you find the balance with creating boundaries, if the people are going to fall off, they're going to fall off. But if you feel that you're making progress, Tony Robbins says it great. He says, what is the true definition of happiness? It's progress. When you feel you're progressing in your life, you're in a good space. You'll be happy, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your business. If you set out a goal for something and you need growth in that, right? And you need to feel you're progressing, creating those boundaries are absolutely necessary. And when you say, what's the fear? Because people genuinely are paralyzed by this FOMO thing. They really, especially with social media, they're really afraid of seeing someone on this vacation or this person at this party and this person here. And I'm not there. I'm missing out. I told them no. They're never going to ask me again. And it's just like, you have to stop, take a pause and really prioritize, to your point, of what's most important. So I want to go to the next bullet point, which is perfectionism. Now this one, I'll read a little excerpt and then we'll speak on that. So again, we're talking about boundaries here. So perfectionism, you'd rather eat the stress than let someone else down. You want to bring your absolute best to everyone and everything you set out to do. You believe that saying no might be a sign of weakness or moral failing. On a healthy day, your conscientious serves you well, but it helps you to stay focused and striving for excellence. But when you take it too far, you become obsessed with performance and end up with a high sensitivity to mistakes and feedback that anything is but glowing. This can lead you to impulsively saying yes to please people and redeem or prove yourself. Perfectionism is a big one. I see it all the time, and I've been guilty of it myself, where I'm not setting boundaries because I don't want to disappoint people. And I'm a giver by nature. I always want to help. I am, people joke and say, Lorraine, you're such a crusader. You always want to go out there and save the world. But I've learned that if I don't set boundaries, I can't save the world. I have to sometimes save me. You know what I mean? And I want to help everybody, but I'm also sometimes trying to help people who are not even willing to help themselves. And then I end up being the one that's drowning. And so this thing for me was something that was a big hurdle for me to overcome because I had a hard time for a long time saying no to people, especially if I felt they really needed help. And I've learned to really create boundaries in that and be a resource in a different way.
So that is confusing, right? Because it's the point where are you being a bad friend and where are they being a bad friend?
Right.
And that's a really hard line to draw because there's no real answer there, right? Like there's no real right or wrong. Because if you have a lifelong friend that's constantly going through a number of things, from bad relationship to bad relationship, addiction problems, poor work history due to, it's their fault, they're lazy,
Right.
but they can't do it. Like, at what point are you not listening enough, or at what point are they drowning you
Right.
in their problems, right? Because there's only so much you could take, right? Because when every single time you're going to answer the phone and they're going to just drown you in their problems and everything, it gets to a point. And, I guess maybe now, I just turned 40 recently.
Happy birthday.
Thank
Welcome to the
you.
club.
Thank you. But I'm starting to realize, like, if they don't have a course of action anymore to repair these problems, like if they don't want to talk about how to rectify the problem, I will listen to you twice, complain or vent.
That's your number?
That's my number.
Yeah.
I will sit there. You got about 2 20-minute calls to sit there and vent with me. If you don't want to talk about how to rectify the problem after that, at this point, you're a victim. That's your choice.
Right.
That's not my problem. It's not my problem that you're choosing to be a victim with these problems.
You know what I've learned? Because I've gotten to the point where I've been frustrated and burnt out, and then I'm a little harsh, right, with friends that I actually care about. Because sometimes they can't. What's the expression? They can't see the forest amongst the trees.
Well, can I interrupt that?
Yeah, of course.
That's because you didn't draw a boundary for yourself.
Correct.
And now what you're doing is you're overcorrecting in the other direction. And really what it is, you're probably not even frustrated with them. You're frustrated with yourself that you've let yourself listen to them too long. So now you're blowing up.
Right. And so the thing is, here's something that I tell people, I tell myself, I tell my son, who you are and how you want to serve people in the world is who you are. And if you're not careful, you will spend time with people who will rob you of that because they will drain you. And then you become hard and cold and jaded.
Yeah.
And you cannot give permission for people to take away what was God given to you, what's innate inside of you. So as an example, with this perfectionism, what I had to tell myself, I had to scale back and say to myself, you know what, Lorraine? You're somebody that wants to give and contribute. You want to help people. How do I create the boundary that I'm not robbed of my gift, nor am I drained of the gift? And so what I realized is, like, how do I become a person for somebody where I can give? And so what I've learned to do is to become an accountability person for somebody, right? So I don't have to tell you no, but if you come to me with the same problem you always come, whether it's, can I borrow money? I don't loan money anymore. I don't care how much money I have. I don't loan it.
Yeah.
But I can be a resource for you to go get help so you can get the money, right? But I'm going to hold you accountable. And so, for example, if someone were to come to me and say, this is my problem, this is my problem, this is my problem. My next thing as your friend to help me with the boundaries and to be able to still do this perfectionism thing is to say, well, what would you say were the solutions? What do you think are ways that you can fix the problem? Well, I don't know. I'm Chicken Little and the sky's falling. No, think about it. Call me back when you have a solution, then I'll help you. I'll provide a resource for you. And for me, it helps me to kind of balance it out. And that's how I've learned to create boundaries when it comes to the perfectionism. Did you ever have problems with being the perfectionism, like not being able to say no and wanting to please everybody?
I mean, I'll be honest. I think it was one of my biggest problems. And I think the thing is somewhere down the line, I inherited a bunch of new friends that all seemed to have it. And I think it was fine when I had a couple and I just knew how to deal with it, and I could kind of limit the amount of time I was on the phone with them, and I dealt with it. But yeah, I mean, then you just got to start trimming the fat, dude. You know what I mean? Like you just can't kind of keep dealing with it. But I just feel like people come in and out of your life for times and seasons, you know?
Right. And it's being aware of that, right? Because when people fall off your life and you're not aware, it can be very damaging to you emotionally, right? Perfectionism to me is a form of not being enough.
Yeah.
So you want to please and appease everybody because you're looking for validation and being enough for everyone. And then when you overextend yourself, you end up, like I said, being either flaky or you're half-assing what you're doing for people. And then you end up feeling like you're not enough anyway. So it's about checking in with yourself and saying, what is it that I have to do so much for so many people, but I'm not even, and most of the time you're not even doing it for yourself. It's checking in and saying, what's the story I told myself?
I think mine kind of caught me off guard though, to be honest.
Do you?
Well, it was a little different, right? Like I worked in restaurants before I got into real estate, right, for many, many years, I pretty much only hung out with my high school friends. None of us were like that. So I just had not really dealt with people like that too much.
When you say people like that, people like what?
People that don't know how to deal with their problems a lot. Like I
Okay.
maybe had like 4 or 5 friends and we'd known each other since high school and we've been hanging out since high school and I still hang out with them now. And I probably reverted a lot more of my time back to those people because those are the people I genuinely enjoy time with. But I
Right.
met friends through new business ventures and this and that. And you would think that, like, I guess maybe it caught me off guard because you would think that maybe because some of these people were successful or whatever it was, or they were going down this line of stuff that, you know,
You would think they would have their stuff together.
yeah. And I just really hadn't dealt with a lot of that. I just, it just had never presented itself to me.
Right. So when
Then
it
all of a
did-
sudden I start getting all these people doing this. I think the only thing I probably dealt with were like buddies going through breakups. But those were with times and seasons, right?
Right.
Like maybe they're going through a breakup, they'd whine and cry for a while, but you really know who this person is. They're going to get over it. And then things go back to normal, right?
Right.
Like you're dealing with that for a couple months or something. And then, you know, everything's normal and everything's cool, right? But I started dealing with more and more people. But I think that, you know, it was maybe also a little different because when I was younger, you would approve people as a group almost, right?
Yeah.
And the minute they were becoming annoying, you'd be like, all right, you're gone. You know what I mean? Everybody would like banish
Yeah,
them
it
from
was
the island.
cliquish when you're in high school.
You know, you banish
Yeah.
them from the island. And then, like, as you said, I started getting in my 20s. I think it was a little bit different for me because my priority was working out. I didn't care.
So
I
you
didn't
didn't
go
struggle
out.
as much with dealing with perfectionism.
No, not at that point. I mean,
Okay.
I think the only time you kind of deal with some of that stuff and you have to go overboard and it's really, really, really hard sometimes with family, right? And
Well, I think it's very personality driven, right? Some people are perfectionists and they are people pleasers, and other people already know how to establish and draw boundaries. I'm going to go on to the next one because I wanted, these are just identifiers, right? I want people who are watching to relate to some of these things. I want them to be like, yeah, that one's me. And how do I get there? So I want to
Okay.
get through the identifiers and then us to really talk about how they can actually create boundaries, because I think that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Identify and then create new outcomes. So the last one is social conditioning. And again, I'll read a little bit about this. Our identities are often tied up in how much we're doing for people. Okay. This is especially true for women who have long been in positions where emotional labor, the work of nurturing and tending to people's emotions, is expected and demanded of us. It goes on to talk about if you're in a position of pressure to overperform because of gender, cultural, or religious norms, work to self-advocate and distribute the work in a more fair and equitable way. It is nearly impossible for anyone to stay healthy if they are required to say yes without respite. So this is a thing with social conditioning, right? And this is where boundaries are really hard. And I'm going to speak more so for the women, and then where maybe you feel like that from a male's perspective. But to the article's point, as a mom, you know, my son's an adult now, but when he was a young person, where did I have to draw the line of being able to tell my kid, no, this is a hard no, without feeling guilty as a parent, or wanting to have a social life, or at the time I was a single mother, dating, and what were the healthy boundaries of when my son was to be a part of that dating world, you know, as far as meeting somebody, or work versus this. And it was just always hard to draw the lines in the sand and create boundaries because as a woman, I was being pulled in multiple directions, and having this assumption and this idea that there was an equal obligation to all. I had equal obligations to my work because that was the provision for my son, but I had obligations to my personal life because I was a woman and had my personal needs and needed my own companionship, and then to friendships. And so it was just kind of like, where did I draw the line in the sand? It was very hard establishing lines based on social conditioning. Do you feel that men have issues with this when it comes to social conditioning, when it comes to boundaries?
Well, I think it's the opposite side for me that I can relate to is just like when you're a kid with your parents. I mean, I don't have kids, so one, I don't know. I'm sure it's probably very similar with dads as it is with moms,
Well, let's say,
right?
for example, then, for a man, for example, you're a businessman and there's from one businessman to the next businessman. Let's say you're trying to build relationships, and maybe this businessman who's much more successful and maybe has a lot of influence, and you're trying to be mentored or kind of move up to that level, and his lifestyle doesn't mirror yours, or it's kind of maybe against what your lifestyle, but in order to build that relationship with him, he's like, come into my world. How do you draw the line there without losing the relationship? Because that's a lot of pressure for a man. Let's say you're in a relationship and you're a monogamous man and you're faithful. But in order to build that relationship, you're hanging out with a guy who's very successful, very influential, but he's a playboy. It's got to be a hard boundary for a man to set without seeming like he's a prude.
No, I get it, but I mean, there's just time and place. But again, that goes right back to what we were saying. You have to be okay with the relationships fizzling out. So what's your priorities? Is your priorities making money, or is your priorities your integrity? And I
That's
mean,
good.
if integrity is not number one, you're going to be lost.
Regardless, right?
It doesn't
I'm
matter
big
how
on that.
it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how much money you make, because I know stay-at-home dads. I have a friend that's a stay-at-home dad, and he doesn't care. His girl goes out and makes the money, and he wants to be at home with his kids, and his boundaries is his family and tending. Is that guy wrong? Nah, he's super happy.
Of course not.
He knows what it is. I wouldn't even care if it was on the opposite spectrum and what most people would call like kind of a villain in life, and they say like, I'm a gangster type and these are my boundaries and this is what I stand for. I mean, they're consistent. As long as they're okay with all that and they meet that criteria, they're going to be okay mentally. And that's going to be the first thing that you need to get in balance before anything. You know what I mean? So what do you stand for?
I think it goes back to what you said about prioritizing things. So that's going to bring me into actually setting boundaries. So we
Yes.
have these identifiers. These are good examples of why people don't set boundaries. So now let's talk about actually setting them. And another article that I read was in the Positive Psychology Today, and I'll have a reference page so people who actually want to go in and read the articles. They're really good. There's even worksheets and all that stuff for people out there. But what are some of the advantages? First, let's start with that, to actually setting healthy boundaries. Okay, because there's boundaries and then there's healthy boundaries. And I think sometimes people will create boundaries that they think are healthy, but they're actually not, such as isolating boundaries. They're so hurt and jaded and afraid that they cut themselves off and they hermit and they become isolators. Or people who completely erase the boundaries and they think those are boundaries. I'm an uninhibited person, so I just do whatever, and that's their boundary. So why is it important to have healthy boundaries? And there's a couple little bullets on this next slide. Healthy boundaries establish good mental health. They influence others' behaviors, the avoidance of burnout, develop identity, develop autonomy, and good emotional health. So with those in mind, what can you speak to on that? Because you've definitely clearly set healthy boundaries for yourself. And I've seen that. You've just got done, even when you did your marathon, even when you got focused and said, you know what, I have this marathon that I need to run. And just with that goal in and of itself was a boundary within a boundary. And you had to create lines in order to accomplish your goal. So what do you feel, or speak to the healthy boundaries and why it worked for you, and as far as good mental health and emotional health and et cetera?
I think the first thing is just dealing with uncomfortable conversations. I don't know where I saw it. I know I watched this guy, Ed Mila, and a few other people, and they're like real inspirational people, but I forget who said it. But they say the first thing you should do every day is deal with the most uncomfortable thing that you have to deal with. Because what you do is you just create habit of dealing with it and getting it out the way. One, it doesn't drag you down all day.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you get it out the way and you build a habit of being able to talk for yourself, whatever it is.
Right.
Like if you're on a talk show and somebody tells you they don't want your water bottle on the table, but you're trying to monitor your water, put it on the table.
Whatever, Sam.
That's one. No, but anyways, like even with the half marathon, it was a thing. Like, do you know how many people I got that were like, oh, you're an extremist, you're a this, you're a that. I mean, for me, I realize I like pushing myself. I like being in the gym twice a day. I like going out and running. I feel good. You know what I mean?
So you were clear. You became clear on that, regardless of what. I think that's really good because that is the trap we get ourselves into when we're trying to create boundaries and live a life that's more clear on our I forget the word I'm thinking of, but the priority thing. It's being in alignment is what I'm basically trying to say. And you're gonna have people that are going to be naysayers. I mean, I remember, when you were doing this, you were like, I'm not drinking while no alcohol. But there are times with your career and what you do that requires you to be in social environments where people are drinking. And it's so crazy because I see it all the time with people who don't drink. Whether they're in sobriety or they just don't want to drink, the pressure they get from the social group that is drinking. Why aren't you having a drink? Why don't you have a drink? And it's like it's almost every other person wants to know why they're not drinking. And it's always really refreshing to see that person establish those boundaries and not, uh, get tempted by the people who are trying to encourage them to do. Why do you think people are like that? Why do you think they try to encourage people to do what they're doing? It's like uncomfortable for the person. The person who sets the boundaries, the people who don't have boundaries are always uncomfortable by those people.
I think that a lot of people kind of even just reverting back to the work thing I talked to you about, things like that. When you have a discipline that most people don't have, I hate to say it, a lot of times they want to drag you down on their level.
Yeah.
People like enablers. People want
Correct.
to surround themselves with people that basically approve of their behaviors. But it's really weird to me because with that particular thing, right? Especially, and because I don't know if you've noticed, I cut drinking out a lot. Drinking's very hard on me and my body. So when I do drink, like for whatever reason, I can't really sleep and it's very hard on me.
Yeah.
So I cut it out often. So it's something that I've dealt with, a lot. And I think that's more what it is. I think people feel like they can't be themselves unless you're right there doing the same thing with them, like almost like you're judging them and really they're self-conscious.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's what I
Yeah.
think. I'm not too sure because if I was drinking and somebody else wasn't drinking, I don't know, for whatever's in me, I just wouldn't think twice about it.
Right.
I'd just be like, okay.
But that's because you're comfortable with who you are. And that's another thing that I want to kind of emphasize here is that because I'm a big boundary setter.
Yeah.
I am clear on my boundaries and I'm just huge on that. And it's very liberating when you can set those boundaries because that wasn't always the story for me. I didn't always have healthy boundaries. And there are certain aspects of my life where I still haven't really established, if I'm being honest, healthy enough boundaries.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that when I do set those boundaries, I am very much in alignment with self. And I'm very clear as to why those boundaries are being set. And they're healthy boundaries. And again, it makes me feel good in all aspects. And when I have boundaries, it does influence, I'm going back to these bullet points, it does influence other behaviors.
Mhm.
So I want to go into how to set them.
Can I go back to one thing on that, though?
Of course you can.
Because it's even something like with me, and when we go back to that conversation, but when I first started dealing with it, like I would over-explain. Like I think one boundary that I'm trying
it's
to...
so funny you saying it because that's going to be something on here.
Is
But go
it?
ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
So,
No,
I mean,
but go
I
ahead.
think that that's like the one thing that like I'm really starting to learn with myself that I don't think I really had a problem when I was younger, but for some reason I picked up this habit recently is like this need to like explain why to people.
Right.
Or to like show them something or have them no, like, okay, like, well, why not? I don't really feel like it. Why do I need to have this need that you fully need to understand? And so the one habit I'm starting to get now is I don't need to explain to you
Right.
anything, right? And because one, it opens up a window for people to try and veer you from doing whatever you want to do, or two, it's making you almost like second guess your own like stuff, right? Like you don't really need to have that. And I think once you can really remove that,
Right.
like you can look at things much more clearly.
I had a friend, a really close friend, at least seemingly, I thought we were very close. And I was out of a relationship and for a period of time. And my partner and I had decided to reconcile, which was like the 100th time we had done it, right? Full transparency. And her and I, at the time I was in transition, I had sold a home, was staying there for a little bit to go into the next property or whatever. And at that time, when I reestablished this relationship, I wasn't really sure 100% where this relationship was going to go because it was tumultuous. It was on and off again. And I was kind of private about it when it first started to re-engage, just because I need to see, I didn't need to make it a public announcement. Long story short, it ended up being a thing where people were starting to see that we were together again. And she was not pleased. Now, I understood her on being unhappy about my choice to go back because of all of the heartache. She was my shoulder to cry on, so I understand her concern. But here we talk about boundaries, because instead of a conversation where we could communicate those feelings, she just became a different person and used other reasons and things to kind of attack me. And to your point of the over speaking or me over explaining, I said, if you're feeling some kind of way about the situation, just say that to me. But all these other things that you're doing that were kind of mean spirited because you're not happy, you're not communicating, and you're overstepping the bounds. And it got out of line. And so I had to draw the line in the sand and say, this friendship is done. You are absolutely someone who's allowed to share with me how you think and feel about a situation, because I've been open to you and I understand that you don't want to see me hurt, but you don't get to mistreat me because you're displeased with my choice. And I had to draw the line in the sand, and it was a very hard decision because it means that I have to let go of a friendship that I thought was very valuable in my life. But it was about drawing lines in the sand. I could be making the worst decision in my life, but you don't get to mistreat me. If you're like, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want you to talk about it, you can create those boundaries. I'm not happy with your choice that you're making, so please don't, if you go through a thing with this person, don't talk to me about it anymore. That would have been a clear line in the sand, and I would respect those boundaries. But that's the thing, is that sometimes with people, when we're establishing boundaries, we don't know how to do it. So we mistreat or we misbehave or we act a certain kind of way instead of just having the conversation and setting the boundaries. So here's how we set down boundaries. There's 4 bullet points here. It's define, communicate, stay simple, and set consequences. Okay. So the first one, define, identify desired boundaries. So in the example that I was giving, it would have been a conversation. It's communication. You're upset with me because you think I'm making a bad choice. I hear you. I don't necessarily disagree, but it's a choice I'm making for my life, not for yours. So with this, how do we establish the right boundaries here so we can maintain a friendship? It's just simply defining that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to defining the boundary?
Well, I can kind of relate to what you're saying, right? Because sometimes, like, yours was a relationship. I've had other things, whether it was relationships or family or this or that. A hard boundary to define is, when do you give up and move on with certain things, right?
Right.
So, one, your relationship's going great from my understanding of everything. So right now it seems like your choice was a good choice, right? Like, you continue working on
Well,
things.
I eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, yeah, but I mean, it's a work in progress, right? But I also think that is also a cultural difference between now and back in the day. Like, back in the day, in the 50s, you got married, people would go through bankruptcies, this, that. It was not culturally normal for people to break up and divorce.
But
so people would ride through it. So I think people now sometimes maybe have too loose of boundaries with cutting people off with certain things, but with other things they don't.
And it's more specific as we hone it in, like identifying desired boundaries.
Yeah.
It's basically like, what is the boundary? Everyone knows when a boundary has been overstepped.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing that, whether it's with a coworker, whether it's in a personal relationship, whether it's a friendship, business, whatever, we all know when there's been boundaries that have been overstepped. So the first thing I would say is to say, what has been overstepped?
Yeah.
And how do I define what would have been a comfortable boundary, and communicating that to the person who's overstepped their boundaries with you? It's defining the lines.
I think I just thought of this now, actually. So defining the lines would be with people, especially when the boundary's been drawn, you have communicated it, and you can no longer communicate to move past it and progress so that these things don't happen again. I think that some of these aren't just as black and white as that, but that is also where you need to separate emotional and mental.
Which goes to the second part, which is communicate.
Right.
Say what you need.
Yes.
I can say, these are my boundaries. Sam, you're my friend. Here's my boundaries. This is what I need, and this is why, without over explaining, but these are my boundaries. And then you can communicate back to me what you heard and how that fits your need. And then together, if we care about the relationship, we set the boundaries. Some boundaries, it's just simply what you did, that is unacceptable. Whether it's a coworker that is inappropriate with jokes or getting a little bit too much in my space or, whatever. It's a communication thing. And again, we're going to go back to the third thing, which is stay simple, right? And you said it perfectly a few moments ago. You don't have to over explain yourself. When the example I gave about the friendship, I remember there was this back and forth conversation through text, and I'm like, what is the issue that you have? This is a choice I'm making for my life. But why are you doing X, Y, and Z? It has nothing to do with your feelings about this. Just be honest. You're in your feelings about it. Be honest. Have the conversation with me. But I almost felt like I was trying to pull teeth to get them to do that. And they just kept doing these little silly trivial things.
They were being passive aggressive.
Well, passive aggressive. And then they were being petty. They were doing little petty things that had nothing to do with what they were feeling. And I felt as though I was over explaining and over wanting something out of the friendship to kind of keep it there until I finally had to say the consequences, which is the fourth one, to set the consequence. This friendship no longer serves me. If I have to beg and plead and say these things and they're coming back with these nasty comments or posting stupid stuff on social media or this and that, it got really petty. And I said, okay, the consequences, the friendship's over.
Yeah.
And it's painful, but for my own health, it just was something that needed to be done. So consequences are important. Why are they important, do you think?
Because then there's no actual boundary.
Exactly. That's so simply put, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a consequence when you set boundaries, the person's never going to respect the boundaries.
And honestly, do you know what I'm learning? There is you try and start a conversation, if they don't do it, I don't even want to reprimand somebody, like a parent or something anymore, over explain. I just completely remove, because you never know. The person might get it later and just come back around. It's not like I need to punish somebody because I don't agree with what's going on around me. I'm just at a point where I'm I just want to remove myself from the situation.
Right. Yeah. All right. So there's a little referencing. We're going to conclude. And I want you to give me your final thoughts on why boundaries are important to set and how to set them. But if for anybody that's watching the show, a lot of these reference points come from positivepsychology.com, an article by Joaquin Silva, and then Psychology Today, article written by Christine Lee. So if you want to look more into this, please reference those links. There's some workbooks and things like that to help you actually go through the whole boundary thing. So in conclusion, Sam, what would you say about boundaries? What the importance of boundaries are, and setting them, I guess. Well, just your final thoughts.
I think the final thought is learning how to communicate effectively. I think it's the most important thing. You don't need to come at people sideways because they're doing something you don't agree to, because you're just adding fuel to the fire. I think the biggest problem people have is communication, right? And they let this buildup happen with them, and it happens over and over and over. You need to, one, like I kind of said, if there's an uncomfortable conversation, just get in the habit of dealing with it right away. But deal with it in a positive manner. Don't come at people and then take that information, analyze it. Don't have a pre-decided, don't go, because then you're being passive aggressive. Why even go into a conversation if you're going in that conversation to steer it to go one way or another? You should go into it, give your thoughts, listen to them, because I hate to say it, they may give you a point of view, if you actually listen to them, that may change your whole opinion about yourself. So you need to go into it open-minded, listen, and then walk away from it and then just figure out what you want to do. But you need to be effective at it, because if you let stuff just stew and you kind of are flaky with your own intentions, the only person you're harming is yourself, right?
Well said. Yeah, I say this. It doesn't matter if it's your parents, if it's a family member, if it's your child, if it's your lover, your friend, your coworker, your boss. Boundaries have to be established for your peace of mind, for your mental health. Boundaries say this: I am enough. I am sufficient. I've made me the priority. And I'm setting these boundaries because I care about myself, but also because I care and love about other people. Just because people are of importance in your life, it doesn't mean they have permission to overstep their boundaries with you. but that requires you to take the responsibility to set the boundaries. So thank you, Sam. I
Yeah, you're
really
welcome.
appreciate you coming on the show. Again, for those of you that are watching, if you like the content, do not forget to subscribe to the show. Give us a thumbs up. And until next time, thank you for watching The Mindsetters. Ciao, y'all.
Bye.